the people who are doing the cancelling, I think, forget that they have as much capacity usually to be the things they don't like.
Yeah.
And when you can see your own capacity to be the things you don't like, that's how you're able to forgive people.
Yeah.
You know, that's the missing part of the whole cancel culture phenomenon. It's sort of unforgiving.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, I have with me here in the studio presenting to you Vanity von Glow.
Yes.
Welcome, Vanity. But by her description on Twitter, internationally ignored superstar. Is that the one?
It's true. I am yet to receive the recognition globally I deserve, but I'm very happy to be here with
Well,
you.
yeah,
This is
Byline
lovely.
TV will be your launch
Yes,
pad
absolutely.
for sure. Sky, get out of here. It's Byline TV that's going to kick this off. So, that must have been a bizarre experience at the time. You were sort of thrown into the thick of it. I mean, you were just there for the sake of free speech. You get hauled up on stage, and you were there protesting against cancel culture, weren't you?
Yes, I mean, I would say that I threw myself into the thick of it. You know, remember how polarized, the sort of incremental increase of polarization was happening around the time of 2018.
Yeah.
And I had just read John Ronson's book, So Now You've Been Publicly Shamed, which actually, I recommend everyone read it. It sort of breaks down so many of the instances of what we now have the language for calling cancel culture. It wasn't so much a term back then. And so when this free speech event was taking place, I wanted to make sure that, because I believe free speech is a universal value, it isn't owned by the left or the right. And obviously at this event, there were a lot of right-wing speakers. So I did what drag queens do best and showed up to express myself.
Yeah.
But just as things are, as we all know how...
So you weren't booked to go on the stage
I
initially
was.
then? Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was supposed to be at Hyde Park Corner initially, and then so many people
So
were
how
going
did
to be there.
that pairing initially happen? How did you get in touch and say, I want to get on that stage, or...?
So a friend of mine was familiar with the event and involved in it, and knew that I had, knew that I certainly like to think I have strong principles around free speech, so said, will you do this? And it was something that I weighed up, but I decided that, and like I said in my time on stage at the Day for Freedom, free speech is the principle by which minority groups are able to organize, such as my community, you know, the LGBT community.
So making very kind of like left-wing, traditionally left-wing, or I guess more modern left-wing arguments to a predominantly right-wing audience, how did that go down?
Well, I knew that there was a risk of being not well received by the audience, because there was like 4,000 people on Whitehall.
It was a huge crowd on a hot day, yeah.
And I did think, you know, they might not want to hear me sing Shania Twain's That Don't Impress Me Much. But I did nevertheless.
And the reason you sang that was because?
Well, because Shania Twain, people were trying to cancel her just that very week. I thought, well, this is timely. She had said that she may have, she understood why people voted for Trump, and that she might have done so had she lived in America herself. I think something that always frustrates me around the tone of, because to be clear, I don't think that cancel culture refers to censure or criticism. That's part of living in the world. Cancel culture is where people start petitioning venues to have, you know, Shania Twain's concert pulled, and where people try and kick up a stink. The ironic thing for me being that this is exactly what happened to me in the wake of the event. And by in the wake of the event, I mean within 24 hours, before anyone had even seen what I'd said on stage.
So you were telling me before, it was your birthday that day.
It was also my birthday.
You went along, it was your birthday, it was a new, big experience. You had some gigs in the evening as well.
I did, yeah.
And then you thought the day had gone fine?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, like next day, it all started hitting the fan. And what happened?
Well, there were a lot of sort of, actually a lot of people from within the community of performers in London were, and I think I can understand why they were incensed and really confused, because all they knew was that Vanity von Glow had been on stage
at this
at the
right-wing
same event
event
as Tommy
Yeah.
Robinson.
Yeah.
You know, a person who, by all accounts, I have, you know, nothing to do with, and nor do I want to. And I think it was one of those things that the mob is a sort of blunt instrument, and it escalates very quickly. And by the end of the day, it was literally, you know, thousands and thousands of comments on Twitter and Facebook. And because of the heat and the intensity of all of this condemnation, people were actually calling up venues that I did shows in. People who didn't even come to those shows, I don't think.
So they were going out of their way to be vengeful and making sure that you couldn't perform there again, or what were their demands?
Well, you know, I remember because I had a Eurovision party coming up, and so that was cancelled. I was taken off hosting that, so I lost a lot of work.
What reason did they give?
That I was in bad odor. That I, you know, by being at this event, had brought into question my, I don't know, goodness, or whether or not I should be welcome in those spaces. And that's the part of cancel culture that I think is particularly difficult.
They didn't think you'd do any lesser of a performance, or...
Oh, no, not at all.
But it was a moral judgment that you didn't deserve to be around and you didn't deserve to be doing it?
It was very, if you know the movie Mean Girls, it was very, you can't sit with us. And I understand that people
And do you think that was from their own sense of principles, or do you think that was a sort of more of a market thing? Oh, if you come along, then we'll get complaints and we'll get people leaving early, and then it's going to hurt us in the pocket. I mean, which of those two arguments do they make?
I think that with a couple of venues in particular, they were literally being phoned. Staff in the one venue were crying because they were people phoning up the venue. I don't have a number online, so you can't phone me up to go and tell me that you think I'm a fascist. But they were, you know, harassing, intimidating, I think bullying, morally condemning. And it was one of those situations that just got so intense that I understand why the venues made the decisions they did. I have since worked in almost all of those venues in the years after. So I always say I wasn't cancelled, I was merely postponed.
Right.
But I think the difficult...
But how did it feel for you at the time?
Well, I mean...
Did you feel as though you had an opportunity to explain to people why you'd been there? Or did you feel as though it was just such a wolf pack attack that they had to back off and you had to back off and you just had to...
Well, I think it stopped being about me in a way. I think it stopped being... I think that once the sort of hysteria of a pylon on social media has gotten to its peak, it's kind of just, it's snowballed, it's rolled away. It's not the same thing it was, you know, when people were initially upset. I went on TV a few days later because Sky said, this is interesting, will you come and talk about it? And after that, I had this like huge sea change from so many people who were like, oh, so you weren't there to, you know, wave the flag with Tommy Robinson. I was like, no, I was there because I'm entitled to free speech.
You weren't there to, attack minorities, specifically Muslims. And
no, absolutely not. So I think it was a very challenging experience for me. But had I not read Jon Ronson's book, So Now You've Been Publicly Shamed, I don't think I would have felt the need to attend in the same way. But I also wouldn't have known what was happening to me when I was being cancelled.
Right.
And I think that it was a very difficult time.
But I mean, if you have all of your shows like cancelled just like that, and you're not expecting that, I mean, what does that do to kind of like your career, your finances, your relationships? I mean, surely there are big knock-on effects there.
Yes, I mean, I lost, the better part of a summer's work. My shows used to sell out all the time. I used to do a show in Soho that would sell out every single Sunday. And so, it was sort of a fork in the road for me because I had to go around a long way to get back to where I already was.
Yeah.
I think because I turned out not to be a fascist and because, I'm a member of a community of performers. And I think that actually I kept showing up and I just kept entertaining. And I think that, you know, it's behind me now. But that took a long time. I feel like I could have done without it.
Yeah, well, I mean, is it something that you regret or something that you're proud you've done, or just one of those things that you had to do and it was what it was?
I think,
what's your philosophical kind of like look back on that time?
I think if I were thinking, would I perform at that event again? Because I know that my intentions and my reasons for being there were sort of authentic, and they were because of an authentic belief in free speech. I think I'd like to think that I would still do it again, but I certainly would do it differently. I think if you're going into a very politically charged space, and I had no idea the extent to which, like, if you're within 100 meters of people like Tommy Robinson, they suck all the air because they're so objectionable. So it becomes that you're with them somehow.
Yeah.
And I think that to just sort of turn up out the blue, which is what it looked like to some people. I think that if I were to do it again, I would have to be smarter, and communicate with my own community.
Yeah, because I mean, this is something that's important to us at Byline TV, because we find the crossover territory really interesting. You know, of course, like, there are dangers with it. I mean, if we, at an early stage, get on, you know, very far right people, you know, in here with kind of like no explanation, an audience, because like, well, what are we supporting here if you're giving them a platform or whatever? But also, like, for example, last week when we had Richard Tice on here, ex-chair of the Brexit Party, and we were talking about some of the political common ground, like with the policing bill, the audience is very, like, our audience here is very supportive of that, because they're starting to like, you know, the getting out of the left and right trench warfare and starting to put new jigsaw pieces together, because there's more intellectual satisfaction there. But we're doing it with trepidation, because you don't want to crudely just, you know, throw yourself into an environment where just, you know, the wolves like come in and descend on you and people question what you're about. So
yes, and I think that
it's a brave thing to do.
Even though obviously there was sort of significant negative fallout for me, I've always been of the view that cancelling people, so let's say somebody's tweets from 10 years ago emerge and they get cancelled, or they're asked to leave their job, and you know, actually the cancelling isn't so much about the person being cancelled. The process serves to make examples of people. Yeah. And what frustrates me about that...
So it's an asserting dominance thing, isn't it?
It is. It's to, you know, is J.K. Rowling cancelable? Possibly not. Is Jordan Peterson cancelable? Possibly not. You know, they've got such enormous fan bases. But attempts to sort of to take down people in the public eye and to cancel them, that sends a signal of not stepping out of line to the rest of us. And so, you know, I want an honest society. So everything you're saying about sitting down with people from the other side of the, you know, paddock and and having conversations. Yeah. When I went into the Day for Freedom, that was one of the most potentially hostile performance environments I could have ever gone into. But I'm not content, like I think many...
Because you had some people complaining that were in the audience about your presence there. They would storm off down to the pub and, you know, drink their pints and complain about their day have been ruined because you got up on stage, started singing.
And I'm one of the nice drag queens. I don't, you know, I'm not getting my private bits out on stage. I'm very milquetoast. It shouldn't have been offensive, but it was for some people, because it's not, you know, it's not to some people's tastes. But when you go into the lion's den and you're going to sort of... I'm happier, and I think you achieve more doing that than just preaching to the converted, which is what happens a lot with certainly siloed communities, you know, and so yeah, it was maybe a little bit stupid, but there it is.
So the question then is, and then we'll wrap it up for now after this question, and then I'll do a bit on science, and then you'll be back for the Q&A.
Science.
Yes. how do we sort of break this down so that we can have these more interesting conversations? Because your rationale for being there, when you explained it on Sky, like you said, people then got it. So do you blame the venues because the venues were uptight, or do you blame the venues for being weak because they were under so much pressure and they crumpled to it rather than standing up? Or if you don't blame them because you understand why they're doing it, then where do we apply pressure? Where do we apply work so that people's knee-jerk responses and that first wave of condemnation happen less, and that second wave of curiosity and support happens sooner and more productively? How do we get to that place?
Well, first, I don't resent the venues whose main job is to protect, that business. Kind of threw everyone in the deep end with this, which was a shock to everyone's system. So I understand the decisions that were made, and actually privately, some of the venue owners have been extremely supportive, irrespective of having to make the decision to take my show off the schedule and stuff like that. I think that what we need is...
So you had to be understanding of them in order to preserve the relationship for later?
Yes, yeah. But I think that that's what you do, in life. We want to... I'm a big fan of maintaining lines of communication. Yeah. When I say I support free speech, it's not just because I think I have a lot to say. I don't have much to say about anything that isn't Celine Dion or Madonna. But for me, it's about what can you hear? It's that free speech is about communication.
Right.
And it does frustrate me the way that...
So it's two ways. It's not just about what you've got to say. It's also the curiosity. You're just curious to...
I don't like other people deciding what I can hear.
Yeah.
And yeah, it very much frustrates me.
And have you built relations from that day? Because after that happened and people saw that you were being cancelled, there was actually support that rallied around from you. I understand, even from some people who were there on the day and thought what? Yeah,
well, the funny thing was that I was there with another friend who is a drag artist. We both had gigs immediately after, and we walked up Whitehall, and so many of the people that were in this audience who I had thought aren't going to get me or care, came up and we were pleasantly surprised. And about 20 people on the walk up, and I thought, do you know what? I've come into this hostile environment and I've maybe reassured some people that...
And you've opened doors in lots of people's hearts there.
I hope so.
Did the reach out.
I mean, I'm an artist. That's literally what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah. And you